All right, let's get started. We'll start off with a quiz. So what happened last Wednesday, May 8th? Anybody? No, that was later. Karen? What? End of the Colorado legislative session. That was Wednesday. So we're very fortunate to have Citizens Climate Lobby volunteers Susan Campbell and Bob Blackburn present information about the climate and environmental bills that passed in this past session. This is, as one might say, hot off the press. And so we are real fortunate to have them. We appreciate them coming and working on this real hard the last few days to stay on top of what's going on here. Susan is a retired attorney and is involved in climate and advocacy. And I met her 4 years ago when I was starting the Citizens Climate Lobby chapter here. And she was the leader at Colorado Springs, now called Pikes Peak. And so she's a leader there now, but she also then became the co-coordinator at the state level for Colorado CCL. And she just can't say no. So last year she joined the new group they were starting that was going to look at the legislative team. So they're looking at Colorado State legislative team. So she co-chairs that with Bob. Outside of CCL, she engages in project work on ecological systems and habitat restoration with wildlands restoration volunteers. She and her husband live in Colorado Springs. And her local connection is she has a daughter here. Is her daughter here? Yes? Ruth's going to show up. So daughter here. Yeah, so Karen, we got to get her. Son-in-law and a new grandbaby, right? So here in Salida, so that's Susan. Bob is a retired contractor and IT manager. He also then co-chairs the CCL legislative team with Susan. He's part of the Douglas County chapter of CCL. Just volunteered, again, another person that can't say no, just volunteered to be the 4th Congressional District Liaison for CCL. So he's going to be working with those interesting characters in the 4th District. He volunteers with adult education at the Douglas County Jail and helps to return to West Douglas County Fire Department, and this time more doing administrative stuff and not having any bunker gear. So Bob and his sweetheart Lois, their local connection, they've climbed all the 14ers in Chaffee County except for Antero. You know there's an ATV trail you can just take right to the top. No, you can walk the last 100 feet. So. Okay, he's rafted the Arkansas. They've done some weekends in Salida B&Bs, and they've soaked in the river at Mount Princeton Hot Springs. So we are so happy to have you guys here. Thank you so much for making the trip and for giving us this latest and greatest information. Okay, is this working? All right. Okay, all right. So thanks, Sandy. As Sandy mentioned, I'm Susan Campbell, and this is Bob Blackburn, and we're both on Citizens Climate Lobby's state legislative team. We're really excited to be talking with you today about climate and environmental legislation that has passed the Colorado State Legislature this past session. I have to say it's a special pleasure to be with you here today because we know that the League is an organization filled with people who are among the most civically engaged people in their communities. And you know, we also know that you are deeply dedicated to the democratic systems of government that we have, and you try very hard to be aware about what those governments are doing. So thank you for your service. Thank you for what you do. And again, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. So let's see if you could advance the slides or, okay. So if you haven't heard about Citizens Climate Lobby, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan advocacy organization. Okay, we're nonprofit, nonpartisan advocacy organization. We work on climate change, particularly climate change solutions. That's our focus. And we work at all levels of government, and within our communities, we use respectful communication, and we focus on shared values.
We're really into bridge building. We have members who are Republicans, Democrats, Independents. We cross the political spectrum. And that's something that actually makes us a little bit different from many environmental organizations, is the emphasis on shared values and building bridges. So now, if you can advance. I just want to give you a little roadmap or plan for today. First, we're going to give you an overview of the climate framework that we have in place here in Colorado right now based on previous legislation, just to give you the context for what happened in the state legislature this year. And Bob's going to do that. Then we're going to talk about the kind of big surprise, the April 29th agreement that was kind of engineered by Governor Polis. It's in the press. It's been called the Grand Compromise, and it involved leading oil and gas companies here in Colorado, a number of environmental groups, and leaders in the state legislature. So I'm going to talk about that, and then I'll move on and talk about a group of bills that passed the legislature that concern agriculture, green infrastructure, wetlands, and wildfire. And then we'll move on to a group of bills that Bob will focus on that deal with kind of building out our clean energy economy here in Colorado and our infrastructure. And those bills involve charging stations, resources for local permitting of renewable projects, and grid modernization. And Bob will do that, and then Bob will also talk briefly about a carbon management bill that involves geological sequestration of CO2 and decommissioning neighborhood natural gas systems, some pilot projects for doing that. And then I will focus on what's probably the most fascinating part of this talk, which is wolverines, rare plants and bugs, and forever chemicals. And that's we'll wind up with that, and then we'll do some Q&A with you all. So, and if you have burning questions, if there's something we've said that's just totally incomprehensible, by all means interrupt us and ask a question as we go along. So I'm going to turn it over to Bob here.
Thanks, Susan. My name is Bob Blackburn. This is interesting. I was giving I used to have terrible shyness in school when I was giving book reports and stuff like that. And I would literally take C's in courses so that I didn't have to do a book report. But I thought I was over this because I gave a couple talks. I'm a photographer, and I gave a couple talks at the Douglas County Library about some of my adventures with no problem. But I had like a freak out the other night, just doing just talking over Zoom, going over this meeting. So I'm going to try to take it kind of slow. But I'm going to start off with an anecdote. Got to do that, right? I mean, Lois and I, my wife Lois and I came out here 50 years ago. We were 19 years old, and we came out in an old rusty VW bus and moved to Denver, over on the west side. And the first time I was in Chaffee County, I think it was a couple years after we came here, and we drove through on our way to Valley View Hot Springs. Anybody know that place? And this was before Neil Seitz bought it. I love Neil. I really respect that man. He died a couple years ago. And the one thing I remember about that was that I enjoyed the sunrise from the 3-seat outhouse. Did anybody remember that? Wow. Anyway, I want to give one little juicy anecdote about CCL because I really love the culture of respect and that I find in CCL and civility, just civility that we don't see in society too much. I'm sure you guys have the same sort of culture here in the League of Women Voters. And CCL, we know where that came from. It came from our founder, Marshall Saunders, who borrowed it from the Rotarians. And this is how it goes. Think right, do right. I wonder if that's where Dudley Do Right came from. Okay, and then he had the 4 square values you should consider before you try to do something, take any action. And Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? And will it build goodwill and better friendships? And will it be beneficial to all concerned? I just think that's really cool. It's a cool nugget. So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about the Colorado Assembly and the energy agencies, and I'll go pretty quick through that because and then I'll talk about the policies a little bit more, and then I have 5 bills to talk about later on that are more interesting. I think the bills are pretty interesting, and I think we'll see they're going to have a big effect all across the state as time goes on. So this is the first time I ever was involved with the legislative process at all, and we started a year ago, January, and I was really the thing that impressed me most about the Colorado Assembly was the how kind and hardworking and knowledgeable the members were. I got a bad impression about a lot of them from what was on their websites, and what's said in the press. But most of them are much more moderate than their on both sides, much more moderate than their public appearance. They do that stuff, as you guys know, to rile up the base and gets votes, especially in the primaries. Colorado's a national leader in climate and energy policy, and our legislative committee especially appreciates the study bills. They come out early in the session. They're bipartisan, and what we really like about them is it's a chance for Colorado to leverage our educational institutions and some money and do some research that can really make a difference in the world. It really is. It's more than just spending money on stuff. It's spending money on ideas. Okay, the legislative session is only 120 calendar days. Oh yeah, thank you. You guys know all this stuff, probably. I'll skip one. Why is this doing? I'm gonna have to. There must be something loose in this mic. Do you have any idea? My hand's shaking. I think so, yeah. I know. Okay, next slide. So our committee members met with over a dozen legislators during the session. Already went over some of this stuff. They, not to brag, but in the last year, I am so sorry. Check if there's a volume on this. So in the last year, I lobbied with U.S. Senator staff, 2 congressional staffs. I lobbied in person with my senator in the Rayburn building in D.C., and then I talked to 8 different Colorado legislators, and that was really an experience to do. Man, I'm so grateful that I fell in with these guys. Now to talk about the regulatory agencies. Now the big kahuna is FERC, which is a national regulator, and they regulate the most important things they regulate is gas and electricity distribution. And we're going to see more of these guys because Colorado utilities are required to join larger organizations, ISOs and RTOs, which are nonprofits that manage a group of utilities and they coordinate the generation and transmission. That's a topic that would take about 2 hours to talk about. But we're going to see these guys a little bit more in the future. Next slide. The main agency in Colorado is the Public Utilities Commission. Nothing seems to happen without running through the PUC. They have the full regulatory authority over investor-owned utilities and partial control over the municipals and cooperatives. It's really the whole, as you guys probably, some of you are probably aware, the whole utility and energy transmission picture is really up in the air now. Everything's in flux. It used to be that the old paradigm was that you had vertical monopolies where a utility would own the generation and transmission, okay, and they were allowed to have a monopoly on the basis of the fact that the public utility commissions were regulating them to keep the ratepayer from getting abused. But now that's kind of falling apart, and as you know, the utilities are breaking up into transmission and generation, and a lot of especially small cooperatives and stuff are shopping the open market for their power and things, and the regulatory process in FERC hasn't really caught up yet, so it's going to be kind of a mess for a while. Next slide. In the state, we just set up a Colorado Electric Transmission Authority a few years ago, which is essentially it's basically a transmission contractor of last resort. So if we need to have, if there's bottlenecks in our transmission, the state can actually come in and build transmission capacity. And that's really a problem all over the country, because when you have these different entities, different utilities, and different generation entities don't cooperate sometimes over the transmission, because it's in nobody's interest to pay tons of money, hundreds of millions of dollars to do some of these lines. So Colorado really has a leg up on a lot of parts of the country that we have a agency that will do that. The Energy and Carbon Management Commission used to be the Oil and Gas Commission. It was renamed a couple of years ago. And probably 4 years ago or so, it was the mission was changed from promoting oil and gas to regulating oil and gas in the public interest. So they also regulate deep thermal energy, which is of interest around here with the resources that we have in the mountains. And they also have been tasked with carbon capture and sequestration if that pans out to be a viable technology. And we don't know yet. It's being researched for billions of dollars right now by the Department of Energy. Then we have the Colorado Energy Office, which is state energy policy, and they also assist with. This microphone is annoying. I'm sorry, guys. And assist with state and federal energy grants and energy codes. So they help citizens and communities get grants. Health and Environment has a more minor role. They enforce the Colorado Heat Plan, which is where utilities are required to cut back on the CO2 emissions from natural gas heating. And they also regulate large manufacturers, but that's just barely getting started. Okay, next slide. And some of the policies we have now, that the primary policy is the statewide CO2 emission targets. And these are economy-wide, and they include electric transmission, transportation, manufacturing, and structures. The electric generation is the easy part by a long shot. Some of these other parts of the economy, we have no idea how to decarbonize a lot of these sectors, but there's a lot of research going on right now at the national level. Let's see, and the clean energy plans apply to electric generation only. So we have these pretty high goals now. 80% by 2030. It's supposed to be electric generation is supposed to be carbon-free in Colorado. Again, there's issues with that. We don't really have battery technology is not quite there, and we don't have technology yet to do carbon capture. That's up in the air. How much we know it's going to be expensive, and we don't know how effective it's going to be yet. So even just last year, clean energy plans were required for smaller utilities too. Well, you guys are in tri-state here, right? So you're one of the two highly regulated utilities, along with Excel. Next slide. We have the renewable energy standards. This is an older bill. I found out this was passed in 2004 by a what do you call it, ballot initiative, the goals that were initially established there have been supplanted by the clean energy regulations, but we still use the renewable energy credits, which are used by utilities to qualify for the state mandates. And these are called RECs, and they are certificates that can be sold and traded. It's another way for renewable companies to make money. So they make money on generating electricity, on these renewable energy credits, and on production credits. And there's some subsidies on top of that. So there's several layers of subsidies to really make it cheap to create new generation capacity. Then we also have the conservation building codes, which came in a few years ago. Next slide. Okay, so I already mentioned the clean heat plans and the Colorado Electric Transmission Authority, but I'll just, and I talked about this, so we don't really need this. So we already have talked about the organized wholesale markets that we're going to have to join. There's some pluses and minuses to joining that. It makes things a lot more complicated. It makes it easier to buy energy, but there's problems that need to be worked out by FERC to make those things really work, especially for small electric utilities. And then I will pass this off to Susan. God, I don't know why I'm having a hard time getting that just right to the line. Do you want this?
Are your eardrums still? Am I in the right place? I just want to make sure that, okay, all right. So, well, I think we should have come and done a little practice here with the with the podium. So anyway, thanks, Bob, for that background. It gives us a good sense of, the context for the legislation that the legislature has been working on. I should probably say first that our legislature has been incredibly busy on climate and environmental legislation over the last few years. Every year, there is just a very large amount of legislation in this field. This spring, actually just a couple weeks ago, there was a really kind of remarkable event in which there was an agreement reached between the oil and gas industry, a number of leading environmental organizations, Governor Polis, and Democratic leaders in the legislature, which affected the bills that would be pursued in the Colorado legislature concerning oil and gas. So the players, I've mentioned them, they were the industry leaders, like Chevron, Occidental, and Civitas here in Colorado. They're the dominant players. Environmental groups, and this is a limited list. This was not all the whole sort of long list of environmental organizations. It included leading groups like Conservation Colorado, Earth Justice, Green Latinos, Southwest Energy Project. There were several others. The Sierra Club was included. Democratic leaders, as I mentioned, but there were a number of parties left out, and that included smaller oil and gas companies, particularly in Northwest Colorado, and a number of environmental groups and activists that work on a number of issues, including clean air in the Front Range. So there are some, in this agreement, there were, people who were very much in the know, and then there were others who were, just feeling kind of miffed right now for not being included. So that's including some smaller companies in the oil and gas industry. So could you advance the slide? So the agreement, in a nutshell, had two main components. There were things that were given up, which are reflected on this slide, and then on the next slide, we'll talk about two pieces of legislation that emerged from this agreement. Okay, first, and this is probably what truly motivated the agreement, was a number of competing ballot measures for the November ballot. Some of them were sponsored by the oil and gas industry. Others were sponsored by environmental groups. And just an example of a couple of these, I've heard that there were 20 measures, ballot measures that were withdrawn as a result of this. I don't know whether that's true, but there were just enough to say that there were quite a few ballot measures. An example would be there was a measure that was sponsored by the oil and gas industry that involved a ban on local rules or state rules limiting natural gas, limiting gas appliances, such as the one in Crested Butte that you may be aware of. Also, there was a measure that came from an environmental group or a group of environmental groups that would have created strict liability for damages caused by oil and gas operations. And if you know anything about the law of strict liability, the reason that was probably pretty scary to the oil and gas industry is that there are hardly any defenses where there is strict liability in the law. In other words, you can't say, well, we just followed best practices, or we followed what was reasonable, or we were not negligent. Those are not defenses. If there's damage, if damage is proved, and it was related to an oil and gas drilling project, you would be strictly liable for it. And so that really made the oil and gas industry nervous because they were afraid it might get passed. So anyway, there were these competing ballot issues. There was a lot of concern it would create confusion among the voters. It would create some extreme law. So that was a factor in this agreement, and part of the agreement was giving up, pulling out, withdrawing those ballot measures. It also would have been a very busy ballot. A lot of measures on the ballot to vote on. Second thing was that there was an agreement by the environmental groups and also by Democrats in the legislature and Governor Polis not to pursue any future bills or policy limiting drilling or hydraulic fracturing for 4 years. And that's, there are some groups who really would like to pursue limits on drilling and limits on hydraulic fracturing in order to start winding down oil and gas in Colorado. So that's for until 2028 into the next governor's term. And then the third piece was several bills that were already in the legislature that were focused on ozone from oil and gas operations and industrial pollution, such as that which is coming out of the Suncor refinery in Denver. So next slide. So there were some things given up, but there was something gained, which is agreement on 2 bills. And the first of those bills is Senate Bill 24230, which created new fees on oil and gas production, in addition to the other sort of fees that the oil and gas industry has to pay, with the fee revenues used for remediation of climate impacts. I mean, this is actually expressly in the bill. And it has, the fee has 2 purposes. The monies will not go into the general fund, but will only be used for local and state transit infrastructure and creating resilience against climate change with wildlife populations and public lands. So those are the 2 uses. This new fee is expected to generate about $138 to $140 million a year. Some people think that's a lot. Some people think it's not a lot, that the fee's not high enough. There will be more on this. There will be more discussion about this out there in the press. The fee will be a function of production. In other words, there will be so many cents for every barrel of oil and every cubic foot of natural gas produced in Colorado. It will be paid quarterly, and as the price of oil and gas go up the fee will go up. As the price goes down, the fee will go down. So it's tied to the market price for oil and gas as well. So anyway, that's the oil and gas production fee. The second piece of legislation that came out is SB 24-229, which is, it focuses on ozone mitigation. And it actually retains some of the pieces that were in the ozone bills that I mentioned earlier were withdrawn. So some of those pieces were kept and were put into this SB 24-229 concerning ozone mitigation. Now I have to tell you that the main focus of this bill is ozone in northern Colorado, the 9 counties that surround Denver, where ozone formation in the summer is a big, big problem. And they have been, you know, they are what's called a non-attainment area. They do not meet EPA standards, and they haven't met EPA standards for several years. This last year, they were rated severe under the EPA rules. So there's a real problem with ozone in the Front Range, and this bill is going to try to address that. The Carbon Management Commission is going to pass new rules that are designed to drop the precursors of ozone, not the nitrogen oxides, down by 50% from 2017 levels by 2030. So this state agency, this is one of the ones that Bob mentioned, is going to be involved in creating new rules that, as to oil and gas drilling, particularly in northeast Colorado, that should help to bring down those emissions. Also, oil and gas operators, well operators, will have to have a new license, a license to continue well operations. In the past, they've only had a license to drill. They haven't had a license to continue operations. And so that's going to be a lever that can be used by state agencies if they're out of compliance in terms of the emissions coming out of those wells and out of their operations, then their license might be suspended. And also there will be actions, increased effort to take action to close orphan and marginal wells, which also, even though not much oil or gas, or maybe no oil or gas is coming out of them, they are still creating emissions. So there's going to be a sort of enhanced effort to close these abandoned and marginal wells. Okay, next slide. So that's the grand compromise, the big agreement that came out of the legislature. There were these, as I mentioned, these 2 bills emerged. They were literally introduced and passed in like 3 or 4 days at the very end of the session. So I'm just giving you kind of the highlights of the bills. There's a little more involved in them, but that will give you a sense of what was going on. I also, yep. Oh, question, sorry.
Question about the prior slide on the bottom one is, are the fees and the management of the wells and the possible closing, is that across the state, or is that just in that same area that impacts Denver?
The fees are everywhere. Okay, so this sort of group of bills that I wanted to focus on are really pretty innovative. I mean, they're just, you know, the Colorado legislature, as Bob mentioned, they're so hardworking, they're smart, they are very innovative in the world of climate and the environment. So House Bill 24-1249 is an example of this. This is a very bipartisan bill. And what it does is it creates a refundable tax credit for farms and ranches that practice regenerative agriculture. This is a big deal. The credits are very large. They're given per acre and per practice. So if you are practicing 3 regenerative practices, you get a much higher credit than if you just practice 1. Yes?
Would you define regenerative agriculture?
Yeah, it's things that you've probably heard about, like low-till, reduced-till agriculture, cover crops, managed grazing, certain kinds of rotational or managed grazing, application of compost. And all of these, one of the reasons that this is just so exciting, if you're in the climate world like Bob and me, is that all of these practices tend to reduce greenhouse gases from agriculture. And as many of you know, I mean, we love our farmers and ranchers. You know, we absolutely do. But some of the things that go on in agriculture in America, you know, are producers of greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, that's just reality. But if you practice regenerative agriculture, that actually will reduce your greenhouse gas emissions on the farm. So this is a huge incentive for farmers to adopt regenerative ag. Yeah.
Is there a method to get this information out to the farm?
There will be, I'm sure there will be. The Farm Bureau was one of the big backers of this. So the farm organizations were very involved, very supportive. You know, they're beyond that. I don't know for sure, but I would think they would be getting that news out. I mean, it will be very beneficial. And the thing, you know, one of the really cool things about this is that these are refundable tax credits, which means that if your income on the farm does not result in taxes due that equal the amount of the credit, that excess is paid to you in cash by the government. So, you know, if you've had a bad year and livestock prices are down and you've been, you know, you're entitled to this tax credit, even though you don't have much income that year, if you've been using that practice, you get an offset of all your income tax, but if you've got excess tax credit, you get a payment from the government. I mean, this is one of the things that when I've been out talking to, you know, ranchers in the ranching community about climate change, and, you know, one of the things that they've said, you know, when we've talked about regenerative ag is, we don't have the money to do this. You know, we don't have the money to implement these new practices. And so the great thing about this tax credit is, the first year may be a little challenging, but you'll get, it will be covered. You know, you'll get that back at tax time, and you may even get some extra cash straight from the government. And now, it is a transitional thing. The whole idea is it's designed to encourage people to do regenerative ag. Typically, once you start regenerative ag, it really does lower your costs. It helps you during a drought. So these tax credits will last 3 years, but the idea is that once you start using regenerative ag, you will find that it's really beneficial to your bottom line on the farm. Okay, I'd like to just, I'll briefly talk about the next bill, which is a study bill about green infrastructure. This is SB 24037. It's a study that's going to be undertaken by University of Colorado and CSU, working together with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. And the study will be into the use of green infrastructure to treat water for drinking and also stormwater management. This is also a bipartisan bill. In fact, Cleve Simpson, who is the senator from the Alamosa area, who is a farmer, as I understand, is a primary sponsor of this bill. So it's very bipartisan. And the idea of using green infrastructure is like passing water through wetlands, open spaces, green algae, using green algae to clean up the water. These methods of treating water typically involve less greenhouse gas emissions than traditional water treatment methods that involve a lot of concrete, chemicals, and bacterial pools.
Back to the tax credit, does that include incentives for farmers and ranchers raising cows?
Not really.
The point is that the amount of problems with cattle and climate change is
I don't think that it's trying to, it's not really putting any pressure on raising livestock, but what it does do, I've been reading that, there's been a lot of research on supplements that you can feed a cow or a goat or a sheep that will reduce the amount of methane coming out of their, when they burp. And so, I think New Zealand, which produces a lot of livestock, is actually taking the lead with this. So it might be that this tax credit bill would, this is up to the Department of Agriculture to decide what regenerative practices qualify. But, it might be that there are some supplements that can be developed that would actually reduce methane, and that might be supported by this tax credit. Okay, next slide. Then also, we've had a bill this year about wetlands, and this was a response to the U.S. Supreme Court decision in Sackett versus EPA, and that was a decision that certain wetlands and seasonal streams are not protected from dredging and filling by the Clean Water Act. And so this also was a bipartisan bill, and what it did was, Colorado stepped into the gap and extended state protection for these wetlands and seasonal streams that were previously covered by the Clean Water Act. And so this law actually sets up a program for dredge and fill operations. The idea is to try to control dredging and filling of wetlands and seasonal streams. In Colorado, those water sources are actually very important for us, particularly given our extended drought. They're water sources for our livestock, our wildlife, vegetation. They are involved in groundwater recharge, and they often provide natural fire breaks. So anyway, that's what that bill is about. And so if you could advance. Two bills on wildfire. They're both very straightforward. HB 1024 simply continues a state Forest Service program for wildfire outreach and mitigation in wildland urban interface communities through 2027. And the next one, HB 1006, is intended to help rural communities, their local governments, apply for state and federal grants for wildfire mitigation and preparedness. And the way that the bill does this is it gives grants to nonprofits, NGOs, that actually serve to provide technical assistance to rural governments in applying for these grants. Nonprofits sometimes will supply grant writers and technical assistance providers who help local governments identify the grants, find the grants, and do a successful application. So now I'll turn it over to Bob to talk about another set of bills. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Susan. I'm going to I'll mostly just talk about two bills. Let's see. Okay, the first one is HB 24218, modernize electric energy distribution systems. Now, there was a lot of news earlier in the year about Excel. This just affects Excel, but I'm pretty sure this is going to come down to the smaller utilities. A lot of times they use Excel as like a test bed because they have the money to do something new. And there's a big bill. Excel had an energy plan that was something like $15 billion with a B. Okay, and they ran it through the PUC, and the PUC threw out at least $3 billion of it that was to do the distribution sections in the metro area. So then this bill appeared, which is kind of bypassing the PUC, but I think we'll see this. And the background on that is we don't have a good plan or costing on what that's going to cost from the high power transmission towers to the home. Okay, and a lot of stuff is in flux. We don't know how many of those transformers, how many of those substations are going to have to be replaced or upgraded. I know I live in Sedalia. We were going to put a big solar array in at our right by our supply pole, and we found that was going to cost us $30,000. Okay, to replace the transformer and replace the wire coming into our house. So we're doing something else. We're doing hot water. You can use the hot water heating from the water solar panels instead. But so this is part of this is a grant for line worker apprenticeship. And we know we have a national shortage of workers in general. And it's really acute with transmission workers. And we just know there's no way we're going to do what we want to do if we don't get some more workers. So this funds $800,000 to that, and then it's Excel is tasked with planning, costing, and executing an upgrade of the distribution of all its distribution everywhere in the state. Okay, and it's going to recover its expenses through the grid modernization adjustment clause. And this is going to be another clause on the bill. There's already about 6 or 8 that are extra costs. And this is going to be a major one. So they're going to do a virtual power plant program. Next slide, please. And then part of this is talking about new technologies that will probably still try to stagger the electric loads. So it's going to require smart appliances in the house, so that it's called demand response. Or you can look at it as a virtual power plant, because if you can reduce demand and flatten demand out, it's like having extra power plants. Okay, but it requires a lot of high technology to do that. So this is requiring Excel to really push that. And these technologies are just barely being developed. Also pushes Excel to underground as much as possible. Okay, next slide, please. I'm one slide off. Can you go back 2 slides? One more. Can you go back? Do we have one more? I'm a little confused here. Can you go back? What's the next slide? Okay, good. Well, let me do this. This is I think we're out of sync here. This is one of the bills that came down this year that is requiring local authorities to adopt when somebody comes to a local authority with an EV charging plan and fills out the permitting application. It's requiring localities to process that within 30 to 60 days. And the state is imposing the process for doing that. And if locality does not approve the EV charging station, the state is somehow going to bypass local permitting. Okay, we'll do this one too. Let's see. I have one more. Excuse me. I'll just talk about this one here. Sorry, guys. I am looking for local gov's renewable energy projects. Back.
Let's go ahead and just go on to Wolverines.
We'll go to the Wolverines. We have time. We're out of town. Okay. All right. Okay.
The other party favorite is.
Okay.
Okay, Wolverines. So this is a bill which will provide for reintroduction of wolverines. And it's a surprisingly bipartisan bill. It's, especially when the backdrop is, what's happened with reintroducing wolves here in Colorado and all the pushback on that. It's so interesting to see this being a bill that has Republicans co-sponsors. And it authorizes CPW to develop a plan to reintroduce wolverines, probably about 100 to 180. They will develop rules for fair compensation of any livestock that is killed or injured by them. They will also develop a communication plan with county commissions and with other stakeholders. I guess the ski resorts are very concerned about this bill. The reason, why reintroduce wolverines in Colorado? Well, the reason is that wolverines have a very special habitat that they need extended heavy snow cover in order to do their denning. They make little tunnels, long tunnels in heavy snow during the spring when they reproduce. And if they don't have heavy snow to make their tunnels in, they have problems with raising their kits or their pups. And so Colorado is one of the few places left in North America as a result of climate change where there is a lot of deep snow that extends well into the summer. And this is typically in our high altitude, fairly remote areas. Wolverines are pretty solitary and they have huge range. Most people feel, and CPW feels, that they probably won't be much of a problem to people or livestock. But it will be, in order to preserve the wolverines as a species, Colorado could be a key player in that. And next bill is about invertebrates and rare plants, and all that it does is it enables those to be added to our state threatened and endangered species list. And what that means is that the CPW, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, will have funding to study rare plants and invertebrates like bugs, pollinators, insects, and will develop plans to conserve them. But all of those conservation plans will be totally voluntary. And so next slide. The very last bill, just to make you aware of, is that we are facing some new rules about phasing out forever chemicals, perfluoroalkyl and polyfluoroalkyl chemicals, PFAS. There's a whole range of chemicals. They're used in a lot of our sort of outdoor clothing. It's in our cooking. It's in our dental floss. I mean, it's just amazing all the things that they're found in. But they've been linked to all sorts of health issues. And our legislature it's a pretty complicated system for phasing out different kinds of these chemicals over the next 2 or 3 years. So that's that. Well, thank you very much. And if there's time for a few questions, yep.
I've got on my hearing aids, so I don't know if you can hear me, but they've been pursuing geothermal electricity here. Have you worked with these people here?
Well, we do know, I mean, we just through Citizens Climate Lobby, I've heard a couple presentations by the geothermal people who are working in the Buena Vista area. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah, I think it's real impressive what's going on. And, my understanding is it's all kind of in process. They're.
Well, this man, police officer from Colorado, he's been working on it for 20 years. My husband and I went to a meeting. We didn't know who the Patriots were. It was sponsored by the Patriots. So at one point, Fred Henderson said, "How many of you believe in climate change?" It was my husband and me.
Oh.
100 people.
Yeah.
All the rest of them were opposed to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there have been some bills in previous sessions about geothermal, and we do. Yeah, I mean there is some really amazing geothermal development going on in Utah right now. If you've ever heard of the FARVO, FARVO, all caps, the FARVO project in Utah is pretty amazing. It's really coming along. Go online, read about it. I just heard about it recently on a webinar. Yeah, it's really exciting. So. Yep, I don't like to do that myself, so. Yeah.
Question about the bill that was about, I think it was putting lines under ground. Do you know if that impacts smaller utilities? We have a situation in Buena Vista where our utility came in and just said, we're going to basically bulldoze any trees and anywhere near our power line. We as a community think there's a better option. Is this designed for that, or is it?
Well, the bill I talked about applies only to Excel at this time, and I don't think there are hard requirements about it, but they're encouraging Excel to do this, and I'm not sure exactly what that means, because it's expensive, as you know, and they're probably going to wait until they see how much all the rest of this is going to cost, before they get serious about that.
I think Excel applies to here.
Excel's here? Oh, in this town? Oh. Yeah, well, you'll be finding out soon enough. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's why I don't think there's any hard regulations about that yet. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, as a former public interest environmental lobbyist for the U.S. Senate many years ago, I understand only too well the need for compromise and give and take to get anything done. And everyone who worked on all of these issues is to be congratulated. At the same time, I have two concerns. One is the legislative concern or interest in study bills. Of course, we need to have excellent research before you can even start to write a bill. We need to understand all the stakeholders and all the implications, et cetera, et cetera. But I can't believe that, at least about some of these issues, that information does not already exist. Because there are many educational organizations, NGOs, et cetera, that have been aware of these issues for 50 years. The other thing that concerns me, so I would think part of that would be to look at what's already existing instead of trying to recreate things and wasting your time and money. The second issue is all of this is admirable, but given the real state of climate change today, is it going to make any difference?
Exactly what you have in mind.
Could you hold the mic?
Oh.
Some of us are hard.
Oh, what do you have in mind exactly, as far as what's being researched and studied?
Oh, the study bills?
Yeah.
Well, just that whatever a study bill is going to be looking at, that the first thing they should do is, instead of requiring a new study to be done, look at what exists, what information already exists. There's just a lot of resources out there. And granted, some things are
Okay.
new technologies, and so you have to, look further for that, for more current things. But I'm just saying, my concern about study bills is to look at things and not do anything.
Okay, I understand that.
Yeah, I can answer that. I mean, most of these study bills have a pilot project piece that are built into them. So there's funding for pilot projects to get projects going based on whatever's learned in the study. So that's, when you have pilot projects and then you start learning how to build these projects out, that actually can be used by others who want to get into the field, and it can save money. In the long term, you can actually save you money. So, and also to answer your question, we're in this this huge change in our society right now to adapt to climate change and to shift from fossil fuels to renewable and other forms of clean energy, like perhaps nuclear or geothermal. This is huge. And it affects all parts of our economy. And so, we're having to think about how we treat our water, how we grow our crops. Can we make adjustments in how we grow livestock? Just so many questions. And it absolutely is worth working on. You know, we have to do it. And the pace of change is actually pretty remarkable. So I'm very I have to say, wading into all of this, it makes me optimistic.
Don't misunderstand me. I think it's definitely worth doing.
Yeah.
For sure. Anything. I guess it disturbs me that all of this was known years ago and nothing was being done to speak of. And what was done has been dismantled through the years by different administrations. But I'm not saying it shouldn't be done, but I'm just concerned that people don't truly understand the emergency situation that this planet is in.
Well, it's a huge, I've heard it expressed as a huge change management problem, and helping people to understand these changes and the need for them. So.
Well, I understand it's like one more quick revolution is how
I just have a quick question. So, this lady over here talked about people that don't believe that this is even happening, climate change. What would you recommend? Can you give a quick story anecdote? How would you talk to people about this?
That's one of the things that we do. That's one of the things that Citizens Climate Lobby does, is we think about how to have climate conversations. You have to kind of approach people at the point or the place where they are. And, oftentimes it can involve asking questions about, well, do you feel it's good to leave the world in a better place, or to leave the environment that you live in a better place? They're kind of approaches to how you ask questions like that and try to find some common shared values. How you, sorry. Okay. And then you can move on to, well, how do we get there? There's a congressman named John Curtis from Utah. He's a Republican. He worked with our organization a lot in Utah. As a result of that, he founded the House Conservative Climate Caucus, which is made up of like 65 Republicans. And so he does a great speech on how to have those climate conversations with conservatives.